good to see all of you today. Thank you for coming and being here. It's encouraging that we can worship together, to remember what our good God has done for us through Jesus. You know, we live in a wonderful, wonderful world, a great time. We live in a time of tremendous prosperity. It's quite incredible to think about the prosperity that we have, the freedoms that we have in this country of ours is quite incredible, and I don't know that we always think like that. But the time in which we live is a time in which, well, for the most part of the history of civilization, just has not known or experienced. You know, if you go back 229 years to the origin of the New York Stock Exchange, and you look at a chart, now I know things have been rough here lately, but if you look at a chart from 229 years ago to today, your chart will only go in one direction. I guess that's good news for long-term investors. But the economic prosperity that has been created and sustained in our history is the likes of which the world has just never known. Now you think about the technology that has been created within our lifetimes. It's incredible. Some of you participated in sending a man to the moon not too long ago. And as amazing as that is, you know, we don't go to the moon, but all of us carry around more technology in our pocket than was used to send a man to the moon. There's incredible opportunity in our country. Incredible opportunity. We're able to move forward in some sense. We can gain an education. We live in a country that cares about education. Careers offer us tremendous opportunity. They afford us this really unique thing called a disposable income. You know, disposable income, that term, that measure wasn't around until post-World War II. Because before then it didn't exist. A lot of you are going to go to lunch today and use some of that disposable income. Yet in spite of all of the incredible advancements and progress that we've made in our society, in our country, in the time in which you and I are living, it is amazing that in spite of all of that, people continue to feel aimless in their life. In spite of everything that people may be able to get. You can get an education. You can get a good job. You can increase that disposable income. Maybe you'll be able to retire one day, retire early. You'll be able to take a vacation and see this world. There may be some things you people are able to do, but yet there's still something missing. Do you know that if you start looking at a subject like mental health, it's not a very encouraging examination. What you find in the world is, in spite of all of this stuff that there is, in spite of all of this opportunity that's out there, in spite of all that we have and all that we do and experience, there's a lot of emptiness in people. Clinical depression is on the rise. We continue to have a drug problem, an opioid crisis. I mean, how long have we been calling it a crisis? So long that we just don't really give it much thought. If you look at suicide rates, they're staggering. Among adults, and even more staggering is suicide rates among young people. Teenagers. The suicide rate since 2000 has increased steadily by 30%. How do you explain that? How do you explain the emptiness that people feel? People who just find no meaning in life. There is an emptiness there in spite of all that they have, in spite of all that they're working toward, in spite of all that they achieve. In our society, what do you do with the emptiness, the loneliness, the isolation? Well, eat, drink, and be merry because tomorrow you die. That seems to be what we're doing. What's the solution to the emptiness? Well, just get a little more. Drink a little more of the sand to quench your thirst. See more of the world. Go on another trip. Get a new car. Move to a better neighborhood. Make a career change. Maybe you need a new family. You don't like your spouse, well, divorce them and get a new one. And that's what we're doing. And that's what we have continued to do, and yet there's still this emptiness. Eat, drink, and be merry because tomorrow we die. You can do that. But all of the eating and drinking, all of the consumerism, all of the quest for achievement isn't going to help you. It's not going to help you in the least in coping with the darker sides of life. People know the darker sides of life. They're exposed to them. We live through dark times in life. And it's in those times when what we have been doing is tested. And if all we've been doing is, eating and drinking to be happy, we know something's missing. People get crushed in those times, absolutely crushed, shattered, and broken. They despair. Oh, what can we do? This morning, for a few minutes, I want to talk about finding fulfillment in an empty world. Because this is what everybody's searching for. Everybody searches for fulfillment. They're looking for meaning. What is this all about? What we're doing is not working. How can we find fulfillment in an empty world today, in our country, in our culture, in our time? Well, I would suggest to you that we need to do some things differently. There's some new things that we need. First of all, we just fundamentally need a new language. We need a new language. We need a new language to describe the human condition. How would we describe the human condition? There's descriptions that are given. People will explain what life in this world is all about. And we'll talk about what achievement is supposed to be. We'll give language and definitions to problems and struggles. And we need a new language to articulate our experience. I'll tell you, ladies and gentlemen, the language of self-help, the language of pop psychology, it's not getting it done. I'll give you a little history lesson. I know you get tired of me giving you history lessons, but I'm going to give you a little history lesson. There was a time in our country where most of the people in our country understood themselves through the theological lens of Calvinism. I'm not going to talk about Calvinism this morning. But what Calvinism said was that human beings are born morally depraved. They're born morally depraved with sin. Now, we can talk about where sin comes from and issues with Calvinism. What I'll suggest to you, though, ladies and gentlemen, is that a society in which its citizens understand themselves as sinners is very different than a society of people who view themselves as basically good, just a little rough around the edges. We live in the society that views ourselves as basically good, just a little rough around the edges. Now, the new language that we need, the irony of it is that it's not new. It's really not. It's an old language. What is old needs to be new again. It's a language of God. It's a language of God. It's a language in which the Creator has been the one to describe the human condition. Over here in 1 Peter chapter 4 and verse 11, Peter says, "If any man speak, let him speak as the oracles of God." If we want to understand ourselves, ladies and gentlemen, if we want to understand the meaning of life, if we want to understand our problems, then we need to start learning the language that God uses to describe those things. Now, the language of God involves words like sin, salvation, soul. Those words are seldom used in our culture today. Why is that? Well, I suppose there are a lot of different reasons why the language of God has fallen out of favor in society. But what the Bible expresses about the human condition is that we've been made in the image of God, endowed with a soul. It is what distinguishes us from the rest of creation. Ladies and gentlemen, we are not just a collection of atoms. We have a soul. What does that mean? Well, one of the things it means is why sin is such a problem. Because sin that I commit against another person is committed not just against a collection of atoms, but it's made against a living soul. See, if I understand the language of God, then I begin to understand me better, and I understand you better. Because I start ascribing value to you based upon the value that God has given to you. Ladies and gentlemen, we're not just basically good people with faults and flaws, with struggles and weaknesses. And that's typically how we look. We're people with sin. And until I understand that, I'll never be able to find fulfillment because, of course, the language of God involves a term like salvation. God tells us what to do about our sin. The remedy of which will bring fulfillment. Because sin that is forgiven enables us to become the true children of God and to reflect His glory in the world. It gives us direction in our lives. We need a new language. Not only do we need a new language, we need new boundaries. We need new boundaries. Think about the concept of boundaries in terms of our culture. As Americans, our culture is based upon something like revolution and rebellion. It's part of our national identity. It's part of our collective history. And that's history. There's nothing you can do to change it. It's just the way it is. We base our identity on things like freedom. We want freedom. And what freedom has come to be, what it has come to mean currently is we don't want boundaries. We don't want restrictions. We want to get rid of all of these old repressive boundaries that have been part of our culture for so long. Get rid of those things. Those are the things, those old boundaries are what are holding us back from becoming our true, authentic selves. Well, it's been described in the past. I'll just describe it here. You take a fish out of water. Take a fish out of water and put him on the shore to let him become his true, authentic self. And what happens? Well, part of what happens you can't see because it happens internally. The internal systems of that fish start to panic and shut down, and then the fish dies. Now, in order for the fish to thrive, to live, he's got to be in water. New boundaries. The right kind of boundaries. If ladies and gentlemen, if we try to understand the language, the new language that comes from God, we recognize that, He has established boundaries by which we can become His image bearers in the world. What are boundaries? Boundaries are given to protect us. They're given for our good. Boundaries, they guide and they direct. You have a statement over here in 1 John chapter 5 and verse 3, "For this is the love of God, that we keep His commandments, and His commandments are not burdensome." The world tells us, no, it's commands that are getting in the way, that are restricting, that are holding you back from becoming who you really are. You think about just societally, how we're getting rid of boundaries, getting rid of tradition, getting rid of orthodoxy in any area of life. My question is, how is that working? How's it working for people? God is, for example, God He establishes a boundary for marriage. You go all the way back to Genesis at creation, and you see marriage being formed. God brings Adam and Eve, man and woman, male and female. There's another boundary we're trying to get rid of, gender. We talked about that not too long ago. But He establishes that relationship between a man and a woman, that they're to leave father and mother and cleave to one another. That's a marriage. Marriage is supposed to be for the mutual support of a man and a woman, for companionship, for procreation. All of our needs are met in that relationship. It's given for our good. And when Adam and Eve had it, what they were then able to do was to live life in a productive way that God had originally envisioned. Living together in God's good earth as husband and wife, through that relationship, they're able to be good stewards. They're able to shine forth His glory. And they did that until when? Until they disregarded the boundaries. How'd that work for them when they disregarded the boundaries? It ruined them. It forever changed their lives. It changed their relationship. We need the boundaries that God sets forth in order for us to find fulfillment. He made us. You remember? He's made us. He knows what we need to thrive. He knows what we need to live a full life in the hope of eternity with Him. Not only do we need new language and new boundaries, we need a new community. You know, we often, in light of technology today, we talk about how we are more connected. We are more connected to one another than ever before. And in many respects, it is impressive. You know, we can live miles and miles and miles away from people and yet connect with them, communicate with them. Technology has been a tremendous benefit in some ways. Social media has been promoted, has been given to us as a way to make the world a better place, to bring community to the world. Facebook, Meta, their new name now. Their mission statement is to give people the power to build community and bring the world closer together. Again, I ask, how's that working? If we are connected together closer, if we really are able to build community in ways that we've never been able to before, then why all the sense of emptiness? Why all the sense of isolation and loneliness? Why all the depression? Why is the suicide rate climbing out of control? People are craving community. Now you might say, well, things are the way they are now because of the pandemic. And it's real easy to point and just, blame everything on the pandemic. The pandemic certainly brought isolation. I will not argue about that. What the pandemic has done is, or what it did is, as any challenge does, is it tests us. It tests character, it tests values. It tests who we are. It tested who we thought we were. That overwhelming sense of isolation, it was there long before quarantines. In the Bible, God acknowledged that it was not good for man to be alone. You go back to Genesis there, and every time God made something, He said it was good. It was good. The only time He said something was not good was when He looked at the loneliness of Adam. It's not good for man to be alone. So what has God done to provide, to compensate isolation and loneliness and depression and despair? Well, He brings people together. He gave Adam, Eve, marriage as a means to compensate for that loneliness. Two being brought together could accomplish things that one alone could not. God establishes family. He establishes community. In time, He establishes church. Do you know? One of the other features of our culture is this increasing number of people who identify themselves as non-affiliated, the religious nuns. They don't belong to a community of believers. They don't belong to a church. In some, it's just because, they were never exposed to organized religion. Others were and then left. But every year, the nuns, the religious nuns, that group, it increases. But yet, it's not doing anything to solve the problem of emptiness. There is tremendous value in the church, bringing believers in God and Christ together in a setting like this. Romans chapter 12, the chapter there just describes really the blessings of being part of a community of believers. We rejoice with those who rejoice. We weep with those who weep. Peter uses great language when he talks about Christians. He describes them as being people of like precious faith. There's preciousness about bringing believers in Christ together. God bringing us together, He recognizes that the group can do something for the individual that the individual cannot do or accomplish without the group. We are made for relationships. There is a social component that is just built in us. It's because of how God designed us. How are those needs satisfied and met? Now, partly through this new community. Your active engagement and participation in the local church. We work together toward a common goal. We help one another. That help is especially needed when we're made to confront the darker sides of life. Lastly, trying to find fulfillment in an empty world, we need a new vocation. We need a new vocation. Vocation comes from a sense of identity about who you are and why you've been here. What's your purpose? What your purpose in life is. Some of you're in a career and you know that the purpose of your life is not that career. I know when we're young and idealistic, we think that we're going to embark upon a career that we just love. And well, if you can find a career that you like, that you find some satisfaction in, that's great. But even for those who find a career that they like, is a vocation? That's the purpose for which you've been made? No. You need something more. Something more. You know, Jesus offers us a new vocation. It's interesting here when He calls the disciples, he tells them in Matthew chapter 4 and verse 19, "Follow me and I will make you fishers of men." Well, they were fishermen, right? They had a job. They had a way of providing for themselves and their families. Jesus says, "No, I'm going to give you something different." Now, this didn't mean that they were didn't have the responsibilities of providing for themselves or their families. It's that Jesus gives them a new vocation. A new, fulfilling way of understanding their purpose in the world. I think we would describe the disciples as men who were given purpose in the world. Their purpose was to preach the message of the gospel of Christ. Their purpose was to seek the salvation of people who weren't just rough around the edges, but people who were lost in sin. And that is the purpose to which these men dedicated themselves to for the rest of their lives. In sacrificial ways. So what did they get for that? Oh, they gave up so much. They gave up so... Jesus calls us to give up so much. How is it that they were able to do that? Well, Paul remembered Jesus as having been known to teach that it was more blessed to give than to receive. Our vocation is about self-giving love. It is about serving other people with what they need most. And the joy, the contentment, the fulfillment that comes from that is more, far greater more than anything you and I will ever find in anything else in this life. The question is, do you believe that? Do you believe that? These men had faith enough to drop their nets and follow. Ladies and gentlemen, as we think about our lives today, think about what all of the advancement, achievement, and progress and opportunity in this world is doing for you. What is doing for your insides. What it is doing for your heart. What it is doing for these deep questions, for this deep desire that you have, that we all have, for fullness, for peace and joy. And if you find that what you're doing is not truly satisfying you, then it is time you try something new. It is time that you give your life to Christ, to start serving Him and His purpose. There's someone here this morning who's reached that moment in time in their life, and they'd like to be baptized for the forgiveness of their sins, to begin this new life. You can do that today. You can do that right now. If you come forward and make your request known, as together we stand and sing.